Okay, this video is going to be in the logistics category. It's going to be survival cache basics. This is the first video of a series on putting in caches. Now we'll put out the disclaimer. I was not special forces. I was not trained in a class or a course by the military on how to do this. The information I'm going to give you is from my lessons learned and experiences I've had putting in caches over the years. Now, before we get into it, I have to do the shameless plug because I have not done it for a long time. If you like what I do, you can support me over at Patreon. The address is up here at the top of the board. It is also in the description, at the top of the description. Come over to Patreon, become a patron, kick me $1 or $2 or 10 or whatever symbolic number you so choose, like 1776. It's up to you. You can message me over on Patreon. Now, back into the first video here, survival cache basics. First off, gather the items, or start to gather your items. It takes a long time to gather everything up because things can get expensive depending on what you're going to put in your cache. Items that you need, first off, the container. The container can be one of many different items. There are tons of videos out there, websites and books on caching that will give you different ideas on how to do this stuff and how to prep the different containers and the items. But some of the containers that are out there and are commonly used, everyone's main goal, 50 or 55 gallon drums, primarily the plastic ones. And then you don't got to worry about rust. You get those, make sure it has a gasketed lid. If it does not have a gasketed lid, you need to come up with a way to waterproof and seal that lid so no moisture will get inside. Another common thing is cache tubes. There are pre-made ones, and you can also make one for yourself out of PVC pipe. Lots of videos out there on that. Next item that you will see, 5-gallon buckets. You get those, I recommend getting the Gamma Seal type lids, a sealing gasket type lid, obviously. Water is your enemy when it comes to caches. Never forget that. Whatever container you get, make sure that you can waterproof it. Another item that I see used in caches is ammo cans. And they're all sizes, down to your little 30 caliber cans up to your 20 millimeter cans, the bigger ones. I've also seen people use 120 millimeter mortar cans as cache containers. And the thing that I'm currently using the most right now is your Rubbermaid type totes with locking lids. You can get those at any hardware store and pretty much any Walmart, but they are starting to fall behind. The supply isn't there as much as it was before. You may not get the one that's in the color you want, may not be in a tactical color or a field color of some type like mud brown or OD green. But guess what? There's a little thing called spray paint. There is spray paint out there that is camouflage colors. It is drab and it bonds with plastic. Something you may also need for waterproofing your containers that you should get a hold of is large trash bags, especially the 55-gallon ones are the best ones, your lawn and leaves. Some people have told me to try contractor bags. I'm using what I can get a hold of easily. Those bags will obviously go on the outside of your container to add another barrier against moisture. Now for items inside your caches, and I got these kind of prioritized on this little list here of 6 different categories. First off is food. Types of things that you should be thinking about putting in your caches is freeze-dried meals, dry goods such as rice, beans, dry pasta, Ramen noodles is a good one for that. It's got an ungodly long shelf life. Another thing that I've been throwing in our caches, bag soups. This is supposed to be for 4 to 8 people. Well, you can thin it out by adding more water. You can feed more people. Something like this, you can also pad it out by putting in some of that rice and additional dried beans once you soften them up. Another thing that you should put in your caches are spices. Things like salt, pepper, chili powder, whatever you so choose, whatever you think you will need with the items in the cache and potentially need for use with what you hunt, what you fish, and what you forage and find in the area. Something that I'll point out here with your spices, especially your salt, vacuum seal it. This should be your first layer that you do with the spices. Put it inside a vacuum sealer, vacuum seal it against moisture, and then this will get waterproof more beyond that. Another thing that you should be thinking about adding in there is drink mixes. Purified water seriously gets old. Anyone who's been to the desert will tell you that. You need to put something in there. Tea is great. There's other things like these you can find in the stores, these drink mixes. This one's Tang. You can also highly recommend coffee. I know that ground coffee does not have an extremely long shelf life, but if it's what you can get a hold of, it's what you put in there. They got some that's foil, vacuum sealed, foil wrapped you can put in there. There's also cans, there's also the plastic canisters also. And I'm throwing this in the food category also, powdered soap. Dishwasher powdered soap should be in the caches so that you can use that to clean your mess gear. I know a lot of people say, well, just use sand from the side of the river to clean your mess gear and you'll be just fine. Well, guess what? Stuff shits and pisses on that sand. If you're going to be living out in the field for potentially a long period of time in a survival situation or in a resistance situation, if you're just using sand all the time to clean your mess gear, sooner or later, you're going to get something that's going to make you deathly ill. Accent on the deathly part. So, dishwasher powdered soap. Take it out of the box it comes in, vacuum seal it like you do with the spices, and then you'll go through and do the rest of your steps for waterproofing it. Next category in items, ammunition. If you don't have the ammo by now, you're probably not going to get it because they are currently tightening up the market. There's lots of videos out there on how to waterproof and weatherproof your ammunition for storage and caches. Watch a few of those. Find a technique that you like. I would also throw in there spare magazines. It doesn't hurt to have a few extra inside that cache with that ammo. And I would also throw in there some cleaning supplies. Things like pipe cleaners, spare rags, spare cleaning patches, Q-tips, the expendable items that you use when you clean your weapon. I would not put in oil or CLP, cleaner lubricant preservative. Try to stay away from putting chemicals inside a cache. That can cause problems. People have had issues when they've gone back to check their caches. They find out that the chemicals have messed things up, especially if they were dumb enough to put the chemicals inside the cache that also had food. It has a tendency to somehow contaminate that food no matter what they do. Third item on the list is medical, also hygiene items, and a few morale items. Medical, all your Band-Aids, all your field dressings, your gauze, all the expendable items you need to keep a person alive. Suture sets, whatever you can get a hold of and whatever you can use. Make sure whatever you put in there is stuff you can use. If you get a hold of something you don't know how to use it, learn. You got to have that knowledge. Next item I have on the list is general materials. This is primarily for a cache container that would go to an area that could potentially be used as a base camp for longer term. Longer term, I'm not talking a year, I'm not talking 6 months. I'm talking you're going to use it for 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. That's long term when you're a guerrilla. You want to move out of an area in under 30 days from occupation. Materials include additional tarps, sheet plastic, additional sandbags, rope, 550 cord, tape, electrical tape, 100-mile-an-hour tape. You're looking at items that will assist you at that base camp location and what you also need in operations. As we would call it in the military, your Class 9 items. Next up on the list, number 5, is spare TA-50, your spare load-bearing equipment, spare gear, and also spare mess gear. Especially at a potential base campsite, it doesn't hurt to put a cook set at that location so that you have additional items you can use, or your mess team or whoever that's in charge of the cooking can access and use to feed people. A lot of these items I'm bringing up are things that I have done videos on in the past. The last area that I have down here for items is additional uniforms, spare socks, spare t-shirts, spare drawers, extra sets of boots, and try to get the sizes of your people, what they use. Have, extra sets, include those. And then also you can do containers of clothing for use as gray man. These would be located near cities that you anticipate you would have to go into for either getting intelligence, meeting with your support networks, or you're going to visit family. Because carrying around those civilian clothes in your bag, it might be just too much additional weight. Why carry it with you? Just have a cache of some of that materials near wherever you would need it. You gather your stuff up a little over time. As you're going through doing the different things on the list here, you're getting additional items, more items to put in those caches. Now, next step, select the sites for reconning for caches. For this, you're going to be looking at maps. You're going to be looking at the satellite pictures that are online. You're going to be going off the knowledge you have of the area you anticipate operating in. Your AO. You know the area better than the enemy does. Where do you think you should put a cache to assist you with your operations? Where in your area do you anticipate you could go to, set up a small base camp and hide at while you rest and recoup and train more? Now, recommendations for these types of sites. I'm going off of advice here from Terrence Popp over at Redonkulous. He did some stuff on caching. He said, first off, you should choose sites that are on public land, such as your national parks, national forests, state parks, state forests, that type of thing. Remember, you also have county parks or parish parks. Some of those may not be known by a lot of people. They're only known by the locals. Well, those can be good sites to put in caches at. Behind that, that's when you get into private land. Try your best not to put a cache in on someone's property without asking them permission. So it's probably going to be someone who's a family member, someone you know, someone part of your support network. Be real careful on that. There are people who have put caches in on private land, did not notify the owner, when they came back a year later, 2 years later, or whatever, to check on their cache, they've literally found things like, oh, there's now a mall sitting on top of where I put that cache. And then they're literally driving through the parking lot wondering, hey, is the cache in this part of the parking lot or is it underneath where a store is? But it doesn't matter, they're not going to get it back at that point, are they? Third, those sites that you've selected on paper, now's the most important step. Recon, recon, recon. Personal experience I have on this, I only find one site that's appropriate for putting a cache in at out of every 3 to 5 that I recon. Areas get dropped off the list because of things like, you know, there's no landmarks in the area I can go off of. Maybe the area is too close to a water feature, a river, a lake or something like that, and it turns out that that area is lower than I estimated, you know, and it's in a potential floodplain site. The areas that you want should be out of cursory observation, so someone driving by the area, whatever, walking through the area is not going to notice the cache there, and they're not going to notice you as you're putting it in. These areas should be hard to get to, but not impossible to access. That's all during operations and while you're putting the cache in. You may find a spot on the map that's perfect, it's really isolated, it'll work great, you'll put a base camp there, and then you get there and you find out there's terrain features you can't get around to get to that spot. I actually eliminated a couple potential cache sites off of my list because of that. The area was just too inaccessible, and the maps and the photos did not show how bad the terrain actually was. As I said, the cache sites need to be above the high water mark of that area, off of that floodplain. Need to look for good, easy to identify landmarks that you can go off of. This is, and hopefully you pick a landmark that you can use even in the dark to locate your cache, because remember, you're probably going to be opening that cache at night, not during the daytime. These caches should be inside your area of operations, or at least nearby, especially for areas that you plan to rest and recoup at. Now, after you've done your recon, you get your idea of different sites, you need to prioritize them. Which ones should get a cache first? And you need to go through and decide what should be in that cache. What types of items are you going to need at that location, potentially if operations kick off? You're not going to need spare TA-50 spare uniforms spread out everywhere. But things like food, ammunition, and medical, you probably will. After that, you got your site checked out, you got your materials gathered up, you're ready to put in that cache. You're going to go through step 5, you're going to prepare them, you're going to load the cache containers, you're going to inventory everything that you're able to fit in a container, and then, depending on the size of the container, you're going to seal it up. I do recommend that, going through sealing the container before you get to the site, unless that container is too heavy for you to carry loaded to the location. Now, when you're prepping the items, that's when you're going to be taking them, you're going to be putting them inside Ziploc bags. You're going to be vacuum sealing stuff. You're going to be wrapping it in plastic. If you're storing weapons, you'll be breaking it down, greasing it up. Make sure you got that rust inhibitor chip inside the bag before you seal up the bag, the weapons in, that type of stuff. That's all in this step. Usually do this a week to 2 weeks before the cache gets put in. And then the 6th step is emplacement. This is the longest one. Now with emplacement, you got everything ready for going out. I recommend when you load it in your vehicle and the tools for putting it in, do it at night or at least do it in secret so that your neighbors and anyone who's observing the area is not going to notice you loading it up. Or if they see you loading it up, they're not going to have an idea what's inside those cache containers. After you get your vehicle loaded up, and you're going to do that the night before, day before you go out on a cache mission, the next morning or whenever the time during the day that's the most optimal for putting in the cache at that location, that next day you're going to head out. Okay? Something that I try to do and I highly recommend, do your travel to the cache site before the sun comes up. And then when you get to the site, you're getting ready, you're going to go through, you're going to check the area. The sun should just be starting to come up then. You should get enough light at that point that you can look around. Before you go in to put the cache in, recon. Make sure no one's in that area. I've had a few caches I've gone out to the site to put it in, and then I found people camping on the cache site or near it. So then I have to scrub the mission. Recon it before you offload the items, before you start walking the items in. Walk into there, make sure everything's clear. If it's going to be farther away from your vehicle and you want to hump the items halfway there and then walk that remaining distance and then check it out and come back and haul the rest of the items up, so be it. But check the area first. Then obviously is move the items to the site. Do it as quickly as possible. Heavier items, I recommend carrying them on a cart like the game cart or a two-wheel dolly, whatever you have available. If it's a couple person lift to carry it in there, make sure you got enough people to help you carry it over there. Now the next thing you're going to be doing, you're going to get to your cache site, you're going to pick the exact location that you're going to put the cache at, and then you're going to start digging. While you're doing this, you're going to want at least one person who's on LPOP duty. They are out there keeping watch for you while you're putting stuff in. They need to be able to contact you quietly and let you know, hey, someone's approaching, someone's coming. And you need to have an idea, a plan on what you're going to do when that happens. Do you scrub the mission, or do you hide and conceal yourself until that person or vehicle or whatever it is, the boat, plane, whatever, is passed? Now, some of the specifics here to help you out with the emplacement. I recommend you dig your hole slightly larger than the container you're putting in it. It makes it a hell of a lot easier to put it in the ground. Now what you do, you pick your spot where you're going to put your hole at. First thing you're going to do, if it's in a grassland or something like that, cut out your sod blocks. Take those sod blocks, put them on top of a tarp, and do it like a jigsaw puzzle. When you put it back in, you're going to go the reverse. You're going to start with the last block you took out, going back to the first block that you took out. Now, you're going to want to keep some topsoil, say about a foot or so worth, underneath your sod blocks. Have some sandbags to put it in, or have another tarp that you can put that soil on top of. The excess soil that's underneath that you're not going to need for the cache, dispose of it away from nearby the cache. Places that work really good for disposing of the excess soil are things like ravines, depressions, sinkholes, or existing spoil piles in the area, other dirt piles that are already there for some other reason. If you got no good area like that to dispose the excess soil at, spread it out across the area, and when you do that, break up any clumps. I do say or recommend try to put in a cache before rain, because when the rain comes through, it will help you conceal the spot. And if you had to toss soil around the area, it actually helps spread it in with the existing dirt. Be very mindful on the color of the soil that you're taking out. Just saying, okay? If your topsoil in that area is black, the subsoil underneath that is sandy or red or whatever, tossing it around the area probably ain't going to be a good way to camouflage it. You might have to hump it a little bit farther away from the cache. How far? That's up to you. I would recommend at least 25 meters. Now, you dig your hole and you check your depth, which I will go over under the actual emplacement videos. When you get to the depth that you want, put your containers in the ground, start refilling the dirt. I recommend saving a little bit of the excess spoil, the soil that you're removing from the hole that the container is going to go in. That stuff at the end, set some of that to the side. Once again, put it on a tarp or in sandbags. You know, save your last batch of sandbags. Dump that in first around your containers. Tamp the soil around the container to hold it in place. After you got the soil, got it in the ground, you got the soil in, you got the sod blocks back on, or you've gone through, you've refilled with dirt, and then you've tactically and tried to camouflage that spot by doing some planting of some of the native plants in the area. I've had that when I've gone into a forest. Not much grass in the area, it's just spotty plants all over the place. I've gone through, dug out the dirt for the hole, there was no sod blocks, put the dirt back in. I've then gone around the area, picked a few plants, and then tried to cover up that cache site with those plants, camouflaging it. Next up, step 7. Not everyone will have to do this. Marking the cache site. How you mark it is up to you. Do not use the same technique for marking for every cache, especially in that location. A common thing with the British when they were going after the IRA, looking for their caches, they knew the techniques the IRA usually uses to mark their areas for the cache site, and they go through, walk through the area, look for those types of markers. Change your techniques. You may not want to put an actual marker on top of every cache spot. Maybe your marker will be on a tree. You carve something on a tree and it will be so many meters away from it. This is part of your landmark stuff. Now after you got your marking is done, containers in the ground, you do a sector sketch. Literally take your notebook, take some paper, some graph paper, something like that, and sketch out the location of the cache. How does it look? Count the numbers of trees. What's the location of rocks? Large rocks, if you're going off of that, or you're going off a fence post, whatever it turns out to be. Make a sector sketch of that area the same way you do on a range card for a weapon. And then put your distances in there for where the cache is at. Potentially put on there how deep the cache is buried. Don't forget your azimuths. I recommend going off of magnetic. That way you don't have to do any conversions. You just get to your landmark, pull out your compass. You know you got to go 180 degrees from that location, X number of paces or X number of meters. You then go 180 degrees on your compass, that distance. You know, find your spot and start your dig out. After you got your sector sketch done, while you're doing the sector sketch, anyone else that's helping you is helping to prep the tools and materials for getting out of there, prepping that cart to come out, prepping the tools that you use to emplace the cache, getting those ready to take out with you. I did miss one thing here. I'm going to mention it for the emplacement. The types of tools that come in handy I have found. Entrenching tools, D-handle shovels, pickmatics, compact bow saws or small limb saws, and hatchets. From experience putting barrels in the ground, the types of tools you need for that is an entrenching tool. That's to dig the soil out from the bottom. That is loosened up by the use of a long-handled shovel. You can use a D-handle if you so choose, but Using a long handle shovel, you can kind of use that also to pry up chunks and rocks that are in the soil without being in the hole while you're doing it. You'd also need a hatchet or some type of compact saw that you can use down in the hole when you come across some pretty good tree roots. If you're putting a cache tube in the ground, the best tool for that is usually a post hole digger. Barring that, some type of shovel. Make sure it's the correct length that you're going to need for going down in that hole. And remember, you got to get the soil out from the bottom. Maybe you're going to need that E-tool that you can put at a 90-degree angle to get down there, scoop it up, and take it out. Now, your sector sketch is done. Next step, leave the area, leave no trace. So that someone could literally come in 5 minutes after you're gone, walk that area, and have no idea you were there or what the hell you were doing. Which tells you too, on your markings, make sure it blends in really good. If you're going to put a marking on a tree, I recommend taking some mud, rubbing it over that exposed bark so that it looks aged. It's not white standing out in the open, will draw the eye. The cache is now in the ground. Who knows how long that cache is going to be in there. So final step here, set up a schedule for when you're going to check the site. Are you going to do it, every 6 months, once a year? My recommendation is check the cache site in spring after the thaw to make sure you didn't have what's called ice jacking. Moisture and frost will literally force stuff up out of the ground. So in springtime, you run the risk that the cache, no matter how heavy it is, it might get pushed up out of the ground a little bit. Well, if that ends up happening, when you do that site check, you're going to have to put it back in. You might have to uncover it again, so have the tools with you just in case. Open up that cache, dig out that excess soil that built up underneath, whatever it happens to be, put that cache back in the ground, cover it back up again. I do have a recommendation that with your new caches, check them, say, 3 to 6 weeks after you put them in. Make sure it has not been found. Make sure that the area is still camouflaged well, it's not drawing attention. How are you going to know if it's been found? Simple, there's going to be a hole there. Someone will have dug it out, more than likely will not have put the soil back in there, so you're going to have an empty hole where your cache was. That ends up happening, well, if you're going to put another cache in that area, you're going to have to pick a different spot. Don't put it in the exact same location. Don't be like the stupid Iraqi insurgent who kept putting the same fucking IED in the exact same hole every goddamn day for day after day, week after week. Yes, there was plenty of them that used to do that type of shit because being lazy. There you go, some basics on putting in a survival cache. The next video that's going to be done on this will be loading a cache container. Over on BitChute, there will be a video on cache totes. That should be next in the series. For YouTube, I will load the video on cache totes after this, after doing the video on loading the tote. Once again, I will say, you like what I do, come over to Patreon, become a patron, kick me a few bucks. Comes in handy. The money I get from Patreon, I typically use that to get items to put into caches. Now, for all my engineer brothers across the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.